Welcome, friends,
to the How-To Heretic.
I'm Uncle Mark.
And I'm Uncle Dan.
And I am Uncle Doug.
And this is your user's guide to life on the outside.
That's right. Leaving religion is the first step into a larger, better world.
But it can be a scary world.
Eek!
Things work differently now.
Never fear. That's why we're here.
We're your audio uncles. And with help from good friends and experts in all sorts of fields,
we're going to share the stories and seek the knowledge to build a great life.
After all, you only get the one that we know of, so you better make the most of it.
Well, dear uncles.
Yes.
Hello.
For episode 138.
Yeah.
Which is
take that, everybody.
That adds up to something, but nobody knows what. And what a show we have this week. I am going to talk about everybody's favorite. It's actually the first Disney animated classic, and I think we're going to take a diversion this week into classic film.
It's not what I remember.
No.
I thought I had a handle on that fairy tale. I do not.
The movie is also nightmarish, but not in the same way as this.
In totally different ways. That's right. And then I'm going to talk. I'm going to just tell another good Bible story where we all learn a good and valuable lesson.
A super important lesson.
Yeah, and then I'm going to talk about with you uncles about whether we've learned anything from all of our cultish studies and segments about our current era.
I didn't realize that was the goal, to have learned anything.
I'm just saying
I was
it
told
happened
there
accidentally.
would be no math.
Yeah. I was told there would be no learning. And by the way, I have to make a point of order. Doug got me in a little bit of a pickle last week because I started looking at all these emails that were going, well, actually, Slardabart Fast was... And I'm like, dude, everybody, we know. Doug knows it was Slardabart Fast, not Slard... And then I re-listened to the episode where Doug said, whoever tells me what I did wrong gets a prize. So that's why everybody was... I was like, are people that insane? So anyway, I'll go back and try to find the first email that corrected Uncle Doug, and we'll send you a mug.
Well, and listen, if I've made a lot of extra work for you, Uncle Mark, and made your time in quarantine a little bit less fun, I definitely apologize.
Yeah, apology accepted. So with that, let's do a show.
Woo! Uncle Dan.
Hey.
In this time, I think a lot of us have come to rely upon and even respect certain government institutions.
Really?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Oh, that's funny.
There are some that still aren't terribly popular.
Interesting.
And I guess the enemy of my enemy can be my friend sometimes. But I think Uncle Mark has a story about some people who didn't like the IRS even more than I do, or don't.
Do we have to hear a government story? I'd rather hear a fairy tale.
Well, guys, I think I can do both.
What?
I think I can do both. So let's just launch in. Guys, we spend most of our time on this show extolling the countless virtues of religion and never any of its downsides. Why? Because there aren't any. So it pains me greatly to have to come to you today to report on that one time religion done a bad thing. It's just a little thing and more of a misunderstanding, really. So I hope we can all just learn to let go and let God.
Is that period of time called history?
Yeah. And that one bad thing was a massive conspiracy on the part of one teeny tiny religion to essentially wage war on the United States and, well, a whole bunch of other people's places and things all the fuck over the place. And this one momentary lapse in judgment of an otherwise totes cool top drawer religion was humbly named Guardian Order 732, or the Snow White Program, which today is better known as Operation Snow White.
Yeah.
The date, April 1973. The place, somewhere in the Mediterranean Ocean on a shitty rusted boat. The source, the very weird, deeply paranoid brain of Lafayette Ronald Hubbard, Esquire, Admiral of the Ocean Sea, and self-anointed Commodore of his own high-waisted pantaloons. The religion, Scientology Incorporated. You see, guys, the below-average naval veteran turned prolific science fiction writer turned portal to the greatest truths ever to be revealed to mankind. Little aside, those are too epic to go into here. but they're a doozy. You can check out episode number 70 about Xenu, Treat Yourself. Anyway, he found himself by 1973, Hubbard, not Xenu, to be a bit of an international pariah. Like many preening cult leaders with pretend Navy medals, he did not fancy paying taxes. As his little self-help space religion had branched into many countries, he found himself loath to pay taxes in most of them. Note that though it unfortunately would, Scientology did not yet have tax-exempt status at the time, certainly not in the U.S. It had actually been revoked years earlier, and that's another story. So anyway, he was also accused of various frauds and was being sued by governments and former members all over the place for general cultish hooliganism and schemes. So he decided to do what any brave, all-knowing wise man faced with such a defining fight would do. He hightailed it to his Panamanian-registered third-hand troop transport ship and ran.
Yeah.
So he found himself puttering around the Atlantic and the Mediterranean looking for friendly ports to resupply and maybe find a new home. And he was out there for years, but they were becoming fewer and fewer as word of his infamy and criminality spread. So you think in whatever port he could, he'd behave himself. Whatever port he could land, he'd behave himself. But you would be wrong. You see, a voracious megalomaniac with delusions of grandeur is simply incapable of laying low and spanning time. So I got a lot of the following crazy information from former Scientologist Chris Shelton's Sensibly Speaking podcast, number 139, where they did a deep dive into just part of Operation Snow White. If you know Chris, tell him to come on the show. Come on the show, Chris. Anyway, Hubbard would go ashore in some place like Portugal or Greece and get to some local official or police chief and claim to have special knowledge about how to interrogate people and get them to talk. He would say he was former military intelligence and he could be useful to them in exchange for God knows what. Being that many of the places he tried to pull this were paranoid military dictatorships or the like, this freelance military intelligence guru done up as some kind of Gilbert and Sullivan sea captain's outfit set off a ton of alarm bells. So he was also wanted by Interpol at the time, the international police body.
Right.
So in short order, he'd be back on his ship, scratching an X through yet another port on his shrinking list. And it's really important to note, he tried on more than one occasion, though he never came remotely close, to taking over an entire country or part of one to make a fully autonomous Scientology homeland, as he did with Rhodesia and the Greek island of Corfu.
Oh my God, that's amazing!
So
I love this guy.
Would
Can
you
I just say I really like this guy?
Think big. And would you let him come ashore? I don't think you would. So in April 1973, with no more ports to ride out the storm, marooned in his soggy boat in international waters, he puts pen to paper or whatever, and pens Guardian Order 732, which reads as follows. Guardian Order, secret, GO 732WW, legal, April 1973. Snow White program. Policy, attack is necessary to an effective defense. Situation, countries are being denied to OTC, that's his Operations and Transport Corporation. The
Right.
Apollo, his rusting barge, and LRH, he himself. Statistics, a gradual reduction of available countries since 1967. Trend, danger. Data. It's so fucking silly. Data.
Are you're claiming that you, Uncle Mark, did not write this?
I know, it is so absolutely stupid. I just love it. So, data. General operating record since 1967. Studied with many uncovered incidents without foundation in fact. Each of these has had in common false reports. Recent exposure of official records have brought about the possession of data showing that in England and the U.S. have in the past spread false reports in several other countries, which have caused trouble. Why? By spreading false reports, a cumulative file can be built in their own and other countries, which then tend to act on the file without the presence of real data, which is factually good, but which is then ignored. Secondary. Why? The tendency or habit of police and immigration agencies to act secretly on record data without further advice, thus making hidden third-party situation. Ideal scene. All false and secret files of the nations of operating areas brought to view and legally expunged, and OTC, Apollo, and LRH free to frequent all Western ports and nations without threat, and all required ports open and free. Handling. Plan. to engage in various litigation in all countries affected, as to expose to view all such derogatory and false reports, to engage in further litigation in the countries originating such reports, to exhaust resources in those countries, and then finally to take the nation to the United Nations, that now being possible for an individual and a group, and to the European Commission on Human Rights, meanwhile uprooting and cancelling all such files and reports wherever found. Caution. The UN and the European Commission throw out the vast majority of petitions as inadmissible on exact and tiny legal technical points, so that to be successful, the most careful handling must be done with regards to these points. Signed, OTC Operations and Transport Corporation.
Look, you can have all of my money if you just shut the fuck up.
No, you can have all of my money if that report goes on forever. I love that report. That's my favorite.
It's so turgid. You can see his fingers flying, and it's this spittle and sweat just flicking everywhere. So
keep in mind, this was one of the most prolific pulp novel writers of ours or any time.
The most, yeah.
He could have taken the time to write like full sentences, but didn't, and I love it.
So that's the birth. That secret thing there is the secret order of the Guardian's office is the birth of Operation Snow White.
Yes.
So it was given to the Guardian office, which is the church's secret police, run by Hubbard's wife. This is her real name, Peggy Sue, instructing them to, by legal means, wink, infiltrate any organization anywhere that might have false reports, translation, actual records of Hubbard's bizarre and illegal activities, to steal these reports and or to harass and or sue into the bedrock anyone making any disparaging statements about Hubbard or Scientology, all because he was rapidly running out of dry land to park his rump on. Religion. You know it's true because it has a covert ops department to steal and disappear embarrassing info about itself. Now, Scientology is hardly the first religion to have a black ops department. Joseph Smith famously dispatched his to burn down the Nauvoo Expositor for printing news contrary to his bullshit. His secret Danite vigilantes and his not-so-secret thug, Orrin Porter Rockwell, helped the church stay true by eliminating anything or anyone who could prove otherwise. And they still have a harassment and dirty tricks arm known as the Strengthening Church Members Committee, who are probably listening right now. Hey, guys. More on them another time. And I want to thank our friend Bryce Blankenagel for reminding me about them. Many Islamic countries have a delightfully named Ministry for the Promotion of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice, who helpfully lend a hand by barring the doors of burning dorms so the girls can't escape unburqa'd and alive, beating women whose ankle may have accidentally become exposed, and torturing queer people to death, and generally just being evil shitbags in the service of the religion of peace. And of course, the Catholics not only have the diabolical albino assassin Silas to help the truth stay true, but also something now called the Sacred Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, recently overseen by Pope Palpatine of Ratzinger before his elevation to Pope and then to Pope Emeritus, but known simply to people on fire throughout the ages as the Inquisition.
That might be the first Dan Brown reference on this podcast, which is...
That doesn't seem possible.
It can't be. I won't stand for. I don't want to live in a world where that's true. So Hubbard was in fine company indeed, but it turns out LRH really imagined himself as a James Bond type, albeit a tad less easy on the eye than, say, Daniel Craig. Guardian Office Order 732 was his daring debut into the cloak and dagger style infiltrations into the U.S. federal government, among many, many other things.
If I had known that this is what you were going to do, I might have sprung out of my own pocket for like cool spy music for us to play during this thing.
Cody, lay something in. So his wife, Mary Sue, very much a classic spy's name, Hubbard. Mary Sue Hubbard, Moneypenny. She had dedicated Scientologists seek employment in target agencies, starting with the U.S. Internal Revenue Service and the Department of Justice. Start small. So in short order, they would infiltrate the American Medical Association for their unmitigated gall in saying e-meters would not cure cancer, the National Institute of Mental Health, the DEA, the Food and Drug Administration, and the U.S. Coast Guard Intelligence Service. Religion. What truth can't be made more true with a little bit of espionage? So these Guardian Office agents would get whatever jobs they could at these agencies. So two of the first spies, Michael Meisner and Gerald Wolfe, were able to get jobs as typists at the IRS. It was 1974. Typists were still a thing.
Yeah.
And it didn't really matter. All they needed was access to the building. And then they would snoop and steal anything they could find in the files about LRH, Scientology, and its ongoing fight with the IRS for its precious tax-exempt status. So soon Wolfe and Meisner found out the IRS would be having a meeting about Scientology vis-a-vis its tax exemption, found out what conference room it would be in, and placed a Cold War-style bug that had to be plugged into the wall. Then they parked across the street and recorded the meeting via the radio frequency the bug transmitted on.
I don't think we can call it a bug if it's the size of, like, you know, a loaf of bread.
Oh, exactly. I think that's called a microphone.
It was probably as big as a coffee maker and just hot as fuck.
Just a giant microphone with a lampshade kind of crookedly put on top of it.
So their first efforts, in addition to this tape recording, harvested 20 inches of files. That's over 10 reams of paper of confidential government information.
Wow.
They broke into an IRS office that issued IDs and stole them, granting them crazy access to IRS facilities everywhere. They broke into IRS lawyers' offices, lifted their strategy papers, and copied them on government Xerox machines. They stole files on other religions, including the Moonies and Bob Jones University, not only to ever so slightly cover their tracks, but to leak them to the press under the fictional guise of a disgruntled IRS employee being mad about how religions were being treated, right?
Oh.
So they also stole IRS stationery so they could falsify documents, et cetera, et cetera. And because they had so successfully found the cracks and weaknesses in the systems and successfully exploited them, the Guardian Office and its spies rapidly expanded their operations against Hubbard's many perceived enemies. Part of the Snow White program was the brutal harassment of an author who was the first to expose the sham of Scientology and Hubbard, Paulette Cooper. Operations Freakout, Daniel, and Dynamite were designed to discredit and destroy Cooper. It was insane in concept. They decided to try to make this serious author and journalist into a terrorist in the public eye. They stole stationery from her that had her fingerprints on it and mailed fake bomb threats to themselves.
Oh, wow.
God.
Resulting in her being arraigned as a domestic terrorist. Just this tiny little lady.
Way.
They imported and sold her book themselves in countries with libel laws more favorable to their cause and sued her in each one of them. They spread rumors that she had venereal diseases, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the poor woman fought back what was on the edge of financial and mental ruin. So they were about to step it up, but luckily their secret plan was intercepted by the FBI and stopped.
Wow.
They planned to use more of the same stationery to send bomb threats to Arab embassies in D.C.
Oh, yeah, because that's who you want mad at you.
Well, she's Jewish, and they're like, oh, who would she hate? Arabs. Okay, great.
Okay, fair enough.
A female Scientologist was to impersonate her voice and phone bomb threats to other Arab embassies. Another Scientologist was to impersonate her at a laundromat, making death threats to President Gerald Ford and Henry Kissinger. You know, stuff people who are secure about the truth of their claims do to their critics.
Right.
So by the end of this madness, Scientology had targeted and was infiltrating so much more than the IRS and the Justice Department and this poor woman. Sub-Operation Apple was to steal documents from the Paris police and French immigration service. Project Dig was to harass and sue for genocide any Australian psychiatrists, members of parliament, judges, or reporters who had ever criticized Scientology.
Jesus Christ.
Project Lace was to steal any files the Spanish Maritime Agency, Customs, and Police might have. Project Shoes was designed to drag Sweden, the country, before the UN Court of Human Rights for the charge of genocide. Project Comb would harass the country of Morocco for its poor view of Hubbard's horrid rust bucket of a ship, the Apollo. Project Shoes was the same infiltration and harassment targeted at Algeria. There was another one aimed at the Tunisian authorities. Project Witch modestly targeted the British Aliens Office, the Immigration Service, UK Interpol, the Royal Navy, and the National Institute of Health and the Social Security Department.
Oh, my God.
Project Stepmother larded on pretty much every other British institution for infiltration and harassment. including the Home Office, the Foreign Office, the Admiralty, and several newspapers and individual politicians. We don't have time to similarly summarize the machinations of projects Bucket, Tunnel, Mirror, Sneezy, Cole, Doc, Orr, Hunter, Happy, Grumpy, Glass, Dance, or any of the other insane capers these fanatical cultist spies got up to.
Good God.
It's bananas. By the end of the 5-year run of this, it was just 5 years. By the end of this 5-year run of this mad black ops project, Scientology had targeted nearly 150 governments, agencies, international organizations, and individuals in 30 countries in an insane effort to edit history in real time in service of their dear leader, his imagined reputation that he thought he had, and his mountains of money. Rings somewhat familiar today for some reason. I can't put my finger on it. But anyway, at the height of the operation, the Guardian office had 5,000 operatives across the world stealing files and going through critics' garbage cans and mailboxes. Today, the CIA has around 20,000 employees, the majority of which are not actual field operatives.
Right.
In the mid-'70s, 5,000 active spies would have made Scientology's Guardian office one of the biggest spy agencies in the world. And this was during the Cold War. Just here in the U.S., the Snow White operation, executed by a statistically non-existent, Hollywood-based, celebrity-obsessed cult invented by a C-plus science fiction pulp author on the lam in a leaky barge in international waters, was the largest single counterintelligence operation ever executed against the United States.
Oh, my God.
How about that?
So nuts.
But all good things must come to some sort of end, I suppose. The original spooks, Wolf and Meisner, got a little careless and got caught. What followed was the largest single FBI raid in history on Scientology headquarters in several cities. Long story short, the whole thing got exposed. Hubbard, Mary Sue Hubbard, and 10 other cult spies got absurdly short 5-year sentences, given that espionage was a capital offense.
Yeah, that's treason. That's treason.
Let me ask you a quick question. I don't assume any of them were black.
I don't have any information on that, but that seems like a good theory to operate
Seems
on.
to track with their sentencing.
Feels safe. Feels like a safe.
It feels good. It feels right. So LRH himself, already an international pariah, was named as an unindicted co-conspirator, and ditching both his boat and his wife, went into hiding in a shitty trailer in the California desert for the rest of his life. So all's well that ends well, right, guys?
Oh, my God.
Yeah, but no. While Hubbard lived out his final days in his trailer, glumly watching Scarecrow and Mrs. King reruns on his 12-inch black and white Zenith,
Oh, my God.
and losing what was left of his mind, his successor, the wee little prince of planet Tigiak, David Miscavige, turned the covert ops into overt ops and executed rivers of lawsuits against the IRS and the U.S. government in pursuit of the tax exemption that Operation Snow White was partially designed to deliver.
Right.
In 1993, harassed, outspent, and exhausted by the little cult that could, the IRS said fuck it and gave Scientology the thing they most desired, tax exemption. So,
Yep.
I remember you've seen the video of that when Miscavige
war
announces
is
that
over.
we won. Yeah.
So who doesn't love an underdog story, guys? Huh?
Oh,
The little guy won. To who? To who? Hosanna. To God and the Lamb. So just to wrap up, a single mother of 3 who works at Walmart and drives an Uber at night when her mom can take the kids for a few hours pays more in taxes than an international publishing cult with madly valuable properties in most major cities in the world that conducted massive espionage on the U.S. government, treasonous espionage, got caught, and still won.
Yeah.
Just that one woman contributes more to society than Scientology. And she, like all of us, pay even more because they don't pay fucking anything.
Wow.
So,
right.
who knew Snow White was really a Cinderella story, huh, guys?
It's the thing about it is that, like, yes, of course I feel angry about them and about how this all played out and everything, but you got to be impressed by these guys.
Well, I mean, yeah.
This is balls. They're just like fucking mad balls.
But you think about like during that period of time when they were in the the full lather of espionage, like that must have been fucking everyone working full time for this cause. It's amazing that it didn't come out sooner.
It was a huge number of people, and none of them with really any specific training. None of them. Yeah, I'm sure there were like locksmiths and lawyers and stuff like. But how did these people have any kind of training as spies? I think they were just fucking winging it.
Well,
It's a
you would
testament
imagine,
to the human will.
yeah. You'd
It
imagine that the office of the exchequer in England doesn't have like a robust counter-espionage program. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah.
Because why?
Right, and exactly right. Like the food, they hated the Food and Drug Administration because it didn't want to license the e-meter and had, they're into niacin, like massive doses of niacin, and
Yeah.
the FDA wasn't about that. So the FDA probably doesn't have a fucking spy catcher, right? It's just, so they were infiltrating these huge agencies, but nobody was really looking that carefully.
Right.
Yeah, once you have the code to the door, you're in.
Yeah, pretty much.
And they kind of did. If they just got jobs as janitors or whatever, it was like, great. I'm in the door. That's all that matters, right? So that's
crazy.
That's if you feel like something's true, this is how you know. They've got SEAL Team 6 to steal information about themselves. So anyway, that's Snow White.
Crazy.
All right. Well, watch out for I don't know. Go get an e-meter reading. Why not?
Why not? What do you have to lose?
What do you have to lose?
All right, moving on.
All right. Moving on.
Yeah, Uncle Doug.
What?
Yeah. So look, I'm in need of truth. I'm in need of answers, and there's only one place I know to go to get those.
The Santa
is-
Biblia.
That is Genesis, where the answers are, and then the truth is there too, but it's also in all the rest of them. So, Dan, do you have truth? Do you have answers?
Oh my gosh. Listen, on our Zoom chat, one of our lovely listeners said that she really appreciated our Bible explorations. So for today's show, as is so often the case with me, I spent the sort of token atheist friend of all of my friends, spent all of my time this week reading the Bible. And after a short search, I landed on a story that I have never heard of, and one that I was pretty worried wasn't actually a Bible story at all, but actually a standout piece of Return of the Jedi occult Ewok fanfic. As it turns out, this is a very real Bible story, despite being widely referred to as the Witch of Endor.
What?
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know it.
I had that response too. As is so often the case, I found it on a site listing good Bible stories, and holy shit, people, do these people even read these stories before they post them? And also, holy shit, Bible, what the fuck are you even talking about? But anyway, there we are. We'll just launch in. So for this story, we open on Saul. Now, the story of Saul is a strange one, so buckle in.
Yeah.
Saul was nothing. He was a backwoods country doofus. He lived in the shittiest town and came from the lamest family. And that's not me saying that. That's him saying that. Here's his own quote. "But am I not a Benjamite from the smallest tribe of Israel? And is not my clan the least of all the clans of the tribe of Benjamin?" So, not much going for him.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, when the Bible introduces us to him, the only good thing it has to say about Saul is that he was the best-looking guy in all of Israel and a full head taller than anybody else, too.
Oh.
So,
Well, I thought Benjamite was that weird pasty shit that Kiwis put on their toast.
it is. It's delicious.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
If you just like salted toast for no apparent reason.
Yeah.
No, he's I'm picturing like Adam Driver, or he's a little weird looking. Let's cast Ashton Kutcher. That feels about right.
Sure.
Okay.
Anyway,
He
one day-
hasn't had work in a while.
I was about to say
Yeah.
it's the first job he's had in a couple of years.
yeah, I figured let's throw him a bone.
Yeah.
So one day, Saul's dad Kish lost a whole mess of donkeys. I love that. That's how this story launches. As I'm sure you can imagine, this was very stressful to the whole family. So Kish told Saul to take one of the servants and go find the donkeys. So off they went. They went from town to town, on the great donkey hunt, which, boy, it sounds like a real adventure, actually. "Hello," he would say to a random townsperson of Zoph. "I am Saul the Benjamite. Have you seen a mess of donkeys roaming around? No? Okay, on we go to the hill country of Ephraim. Thanks." It's a real page-turner, this Bible.
Yeah.
Anyway, just when Saul was ready to give up, his servant, presumably played by the guy who acted opposite him in Dude, Where's My Car? Stifler. You know, Stifler?
Yeah.
Anyway,
nobody knows his real name.
Nobody knows that guy's name.
Yeah.
Anyway, he said, "Well, we're right near the town that has that awesome seer who talks to God and predicts everything correctly and is super magic and stuff. Maybe you should go talk to him about your donkeys." But Saul was like, "Crap, we don't have anything to give him. You know how prophets are basically just like psychics and you have to pay them to help you? Well, I don't have anything to pay him." But Stifler was all, "Dude, I got a quarter of a shekel of silver." And Saul was like, "Is that a lot?" And Stifler was like, "I don't know." And Uncle Dan was like, "I don't want to go down a how much was a quarter of a shekel of silver worth in Saul's time rabbit hole. So we'll just assume it was enough." So they went to the town to see the prophet. And that prophet was Samuel. And when they found him, he took one look at that tall Benjamite drink of water and said, "Hey, we're about to have a big sacrifice party, and I want you guys to be the guests of honor. And I won't take no for an answer." And he grabbed Saul by his muscular, donkey-tending hands and dragged him to the party. And Saul sat at the best seat and they sat Saul at the best seat at the table right next to him. And they laughed and laughed about all of Saul's delightful donkey stories. And Samuel was like, "Oh, don't you worry your pretty little head about those donkeys. They're just fine." And then Samuel signaled to the servant who brought Saul the best piece of meat at the whole dinner. And he said, "I was saving this meat just for you." And then he took Saul back to his place, and they had a fun little sleepover on the roof. And they talked and talked for hours on end. And then in the morning, they went for a walk.
Okay, hold on. I'm very confused about a Bible story.
I'm having fun here. What?
Based on people being nice. I'm just completely confused by this.
Well,
Don't worry.
I'm sorry.
It all
I'm
goes-
just trying to picture the kitchen, this bustling kitchen of this banquet, and there's a piece of meat on a plate with a sign that says "Don't touch." Best
Literally-
cut of meat.
What's really funny is that it says, "I saved this for you," which makes it sound like it is long since either well overcooked or completely cold. But there you go. He saved him meat. I think that's fancy.
Then they had a slumber party.
Then they had a slumber party on the roof, which was super fun. And then in the morning, they went for a walk, and Samuel told Saul's servant to go on ahead, and they'd catch up, if you know what I mean.
Okay, if this
And
story does
Samuel-
not end up with mimosas at brunch, I don't believe a word of it.
You hold your horses. Hold your donkeys. And Samuel got a super serious look on his face, and he walked slowly towards Saul, and he said, "You're a very special guy, Saul. I'll bet you didn't even know that. You've got big things ahead of you if you just do what I tell you to do. Just trust me, and everything will work out fine." And he pulled out a flask of olive oil and slowly poured it all over Saul, and ever so tenderly kissed him, and anointed Saul the first king to rule over all the tribes of Israel and Judah. What? And by the way, I'm not making up any of those details, including the kiss.
I mean,
What is happening?
well, I mean, it was a tougher time. The only lube available was olive oil. You know,
Right, exactly. I may have flavored it some, but all of the details are real. Then Samuel sent Saul on a very strange scavenger hunt, and literally, like, go find the prophets that are led by a band, and it was just a very strange thing. And then a while later, Samuel gathered all the tribes of Israel, and they all rolled two 20-sided dice to see who would become the king, and then they rolled to see what clan in the tribe would win, and what family in the clan, and eventually, magically, Saul was chosen. And since nobody could argue with dice rolling as the best way to choose your first king ever, and since Saul was so tall and handsome, everybody was pretty stoked.
Wow, things have really turned around for him.
Yeah. It starts out real good.
Yeah.
Dan, how
he-
much cocaine did you do before we started recording?
Look, talk to the guys who wrote this story. I am just the messenger. Basically, for several chapters in 1 Samuel, Saul is king, everybody's stoked, and Samuel was prophet. And everything was going pretty okay. But there's a dark underbelly to this story. You see, Samuel did not want Israel to have a king. He was very happy with the former system of God's prophets being the de facto rulers and had tried to set it up so that his shitty sons would be the next judges over Israel. But the people super duper wanted a king. They wanted to feel like a real boy. So God told Samuel to give them a king, but tell them that they'd regret it, which seems like really shitty advice from God. But this is Old Testament, so Yahweh was still kind of an adolescent deity at that point.
Yeah.
Well, Samuel held this grudge for a long time. He and God were always talking behind Saul's back and saying stuff like, they'll see. One day Saul's going to fuck up, and then they'll all be sorry. Saul didn't know about this, of course, and it's not like he went out campaigning to be king or anything, so he hadn't really done anything wrong. Hell, Saul thought Samuel was his good friend, but God and Samuel were just waiting for their moment to get him. Because if there's one thing that we know from the Bible, it's that teenage mean girls have nothing on the pettiness and fucked up evil of the biblical God and his buddies.
Right.
True. True.
So,
The original Heathers.
totally.
Yeah.
So, Saul ruled for a long time, 42 years to be exact, according to the Bible, although according to like any historian, it was probably a lot less than that. Anyway, he fathered some sons, among them Jonathan, who we learned about in episode 32. Mm-hmm. He was the guy who had a very loving relationship with a handsome young devil named David.
Yeah, they were gay lovers.
Yeah,
There's just no other way to
absolutely.
interpret that story.
And Saul was the mean dad that denied their love.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Connecting pieces. We're just connecting pieces here.
Yeah.
Anyway, Saul has gotten into a bunch of dust-ups with neighboring tribes, the most memorable of which, and a big turning point in his relationship with Mean Girl God, comes in 1 Samuel 15. I talked about this one when discussing the immutable nature of God in episode 133. God orders Saul to attack the Amalekites and tells him expressly to kill every man, woman, child, infant, and all the cattle, sheep, camels, and donkeys.
Yeah. He's a loving God, and he's good all the time.
Let's just save some
yes.
time and call that General Order 1.
Yeah, exactly. But if you'll recall, Saul killed all but one of the people, sparing the king, and he kept some of the livestock because, well, that's just crazy. Just fucking let the livestock, keep the livestock.
What a waste. What are you thinking? Come on.
Right. And that's when God and Samuel decided that they really hated Saul and they were going to fuck him up. And also, it's when God started saying that he regretted having ever made Saul king, which, about that whole omniscient thing, are you allowed to have regrets? What the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah.
Anyway, after that shit got bad, there was this whole thing where Samuel made sure that Saul knew that his kids weren't going to get to be kings, and some other guy, David, was going to get to be king soon, and that drove Saul nuts. Anyway, Samuel kept pretending to be Saul's friend, but then working against him with God behind his back. Finally, we come to the part of the story where the Philistines were coming for the Israelites, and they had Saul totally outmatched. And what is a Philistine, Uncle Mark?
That's a bad, dirty person.
That's correct.
Yes.
David had fled to Philistine territory, and this is the craziest thing. David,
By the way, sorry, if you don't know where that's from, you have to watch the movie Dead Man. It's
Yeah.
hilarious. With
just-
Iggy Pop and Drag reading a Bible story, just like Uncle Dan is here, to Billy Bob Thornton. Don't miss
there
it.
you go.
Yeah.
Anyway, David had fled to Philistine territory. This part of the David story someday I'm going to have to get deeper into David because that's his whole story
is a nightmare.
Insane.
Yeah.
Anyway, he had gone to Philistine territory because he had a falling out with Saul. And because, he was fucking his kid. And so he ran away.
Didn't Saul try to kill him?
Well, yeah. I think Saul was going to try and kill him. And he ran away with like 600 of his men. And he went to Philistine territory and became quite successful, leading raiding parties to other towns and completely slaughtering every living person there and taking their stuff. So the Philistines liked him a lot. And he was on their side now, apparently. And they were coming for Saul. So Samuel, the prophet, had died by this point. We don't find that out until suddenly it's like Samuel, who was dead. It was a very strange thing. Anyway, Saul was worried, and he prayed to God, and he asked his prophets to pray, and he did everything he could to try and get any kind of connection going with God, including using the Urim and Thummim. So there you go. Because he was desperate for advice from God, who had ordained him to be the king, but God was totally giving him the silent treatment. So
God was holy ghosting him.
Boom! I like it. I like that one. Anyway, he was literally just not talking to him. So forget about all of those scriptures that say if you ask earnestly, God will talk to you, because that's not true.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. So Saul got totally desperate, and he was so sad that his buddy Samuel wasn't there because God always talked to that guy. So what did Saul do? He went to a medium, a witch, a necromancer.
Oh.
Now, he himself, as king, had banished all of those people and banned those practices completely, so this was tricky. But Saul really needed to talk to Samuel, so he asked around and found that there was a woman on the forest moon of Endor. Sorry, it appears Endor was just a town, who was apparently a really solid dead person talker. So Saul disguised himself and took two guys, and they went to see her. Saul told her to call forth a spirit. But like the spirit that I tell you to call forth, not just like any spirit. And the witch was like, King Saul said that this is illegal. You're trying to trick me. This is entrapment. Only in my mind, she said it in 100% funnier and sassier voice than that. And she was played by a young Whoopi Goldberg reprising her role from Ghost. But I don't feel comfortable doing that voice because white people should probably avoid doing impressions of other races. So we'll just move on.
I love the idea of her saying, if you're the king, you have to tell me. It's entrapment if you don't.
Basically, that's exactly what she said. So Saul swore by God that she wouldn't get in trouble, so she agreed, and she asked who he wanted her to conjure up. And Saul said, Samuel. And Whoopi said, see, I knew you were trying to trick me. You're Saul. But before I could get myself in trouble for doing the voice, Samuel appeared to her.
Oh.
So Saul was like, don't be afraid. Just tell me what he looks like so that I know that it's really Samuel. And Whoopi said, it's an old man wearing a robe. And Saul was like, that's totally him.
Oh my God, that's my card.
And Whoopi was like, these rich folks are way too easy. And she started whatever the ancient Israelite version of Goop was. Anyway, it turns out
it was called Spikenard.
.com. Anyway, it turns out that it actually was Samuel, and he was grumpy about the whole thing. He said, and this is a direct quote from the Bible, from multiple versions of the Bible, quote, why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? Which I think is a bitchy thing to say when someone has worked that hard to get to you.
Yeah.
And Saul was like, I'm really worried about the Philistines attacking, and I don't know what to do, and God won't talk to me or any of my prophets. And Samuel was like, look, if God isn't talking to you, then why would you think I'm going to talk to you? She's like the leader of the whole group. And you had your chance with her, Jenny. You blew it, okay? Like, she told you to kill all the Amalekites, and you fucked up. And so now you have to face the Philistines, and guess what? They're going to win. they're going to kick your asses, and you're going to die, and all your sons are going to die, so shut up and fuck you. And then Samuel disappeared, and the seance was over. And
the whole time Samuel did that, he was texting, by the way.
Exactly.
Yeah.
100%. So Saul, at that point, fell to the ground, half because he was terrified and half because he was just so hurt that his friend had been so mean to him. Oh, and also half because he hadn't eaten anything that day. So the witch shook her head and said, "Look, you sit over on the couch and take a minute. I'll make you something to eat." And Saul tried to say no, but she wasn't having it, and she went and killed a fatted calf that she had just lying around the house.
She didn't kill a fatted Ewok.
Right, exactly. And she baked him some bread, which all feels like a really long time to make
That's
so
quite
hungry
a process.
he's fainting guy wait.
Starting, yeah. If somebody's got low blood sugar, that would be me. The slaughter and baking probably are going to not really hit the deadline.
Do you have any nuts or anything?
I'll be
You
right
have
back
something
with a
that's-
snack. I've got to run out to the abattoir and the mill.
Yeah, 100% that's what happened. Anyway, the next day, the Philistines attacked, and Saul and his boys were killed, and somehow every explication of this story that I could find says that the witch was the bad guy. The end.
What? Okay.
How?
That's basically it. Well,
She not only did what they asked, exactly as he asked, she actually made him a fucking meal.
And it worked. The thing that she did worked.
And she's the bad guy.
Well,
I read one explication of it by a pastor who was like, was it really Samuel that she called up? Of course not, because that would mean that necromancy is real. And I was like, so I went back and reread it, and it's very clear that yes, it was 100% Samuel. The Bible keeps saying, and Samuel said, blank. But there you go. These guys, they're real good at not reading the actual stories.
well,
when
and
they
I
read
think
the
one
stories.
thing is it can be oft repeated. It's never a good idea to be a woman in the Bible.
No, try to avoid it.
Yeah.
Honestly, listeners, don't do that. Don't be that person.
Put
Because you're going
that
to get
at the
blamed.
top. Put that on the top of your action items list.
You're going to get blamed, but not until after you make the meal.
Right, exactly. You're going to do all the nice things, and then you're in trouble.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that wonderful story, that non-canonical Star Wars fanfic. I loved it.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I'm glad that we all now have that moral grounding to keep us going.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
Great.
all right. Well, now I'm hungry.
All right, then let's move on.
Let's find a woman to blame.
Off to the mill.
Hey, you guys.
Hello.
What?
Do you know that we're in the middle of a program of
Yes.
a show?
Yes, a lot of physicists theorize that this all could be a program.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
No, I'm talking about us talking into these microphones, and then we record it, and then somebody out there actually listens to it. And it turns out that there's a whole bunch of somebodies, and some of those people like it so much, and I love this about them, that they give us a little bit of money.
Unreal.
And that's just a neat thing that they do, and so we
It's
need
for
to
neat.
thank them.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, big thanks this week go to Sky, Brian, to Anne the Trans Woman,
Yeah.
to Plant Doctor, to Thick James, father of Slim Jim, and to North Idaho Brian, not to be confused with South Idaho Brian. That guy is a dick.
They hate each other.
The state's
fucking
not
hate
big
each
enough
other.
for the two of them.
No,
It's true.
Even though
And,
it's long and skinny.
And Ryan, thanks to Thomas, and I think it's my turn to give a saint to Andy. So I am going to give a saint, and the saint will be Saint Bob of Lynchburg. And Saint Bob of Lynchburg is the patron saint of very large boats with a lot of displacement, and tomato plants that grow sideways, and also of helicopters.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Nothing special about it. It's just one of the saints.
Yeah,
but
that's
it's
like
Andy's saint.
That's kind of a working man's saint.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's a salt of the earth saint. Nothing too fancy.
Nothing fancy. We
No
don't need to go.
backflips.
That's right.
Yeah.
So there's that. And Uncle Mark,
Yes.
I believe that you have prepared something special for our donor, Don't Panic.
Yes.
For they have raised their donation amount to $10, and that's where you get a heaven.
We got to rename this podcast the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy in Review.
Yeah.
Doug, you got to just stop doing this to us, all right? So
It's just it'll be called that. It'll be called the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy in Review, except Uncle Dan.
That's right. You could read it during your time off here, Dan. It's pretty fun stuff.
I've heard this reading thing's all the rage.
Yeah, I don't know. It's not worth
Give
it.
it a try.
Ultimately,
Something
not
to
worth
do
it.
between masturbating.
One of these days, we're all gonna make. You guys are gonna be making jokes, and I'm gonna be like, "Ha, I get it," and you're gonna be like, "What?"
Yeah, it's going to blow our minds, our sloppy, bloody minds out of our brains, out of our heads. All right. Well, without further ado, let us honor Don't Panic, fellas.
Yes, please.
For this incredible generosity. So, dear, sweet, amazing, Don't Panic. I don't know how do you pronounce that? Don't Panic or Don't Panic? I want to get it right. It's an ethnic name. When at a time too far distant to even imagine, in this time of endless Tuesdays we're enduring now, when you shuffle off this mortal coil, the first thing you see, ironically, will not be a large neon Don't Panic hanging before you in the void. No, you already know not to do that. Rather, the first thing you see upon hieing to your eternal destination in the twinkling of an eye is a bright flash, and then another, and then another. Where did you go? Blinding flash heaven, you wonder? Because fuck that noise. But once your forever pupils adjust, it's so much more than bright flash heaven. It's a languid summer night somewhere, and before you, daggers of light pierce the sky and dance. Beyond the flashing lights, you see a brightly lit sign. It's a marquee, actually, with huge red letters that reads, World Premiere, The Life and Loves of Don't Panic. You look down, and below you is a lush red strip of carpet leading towards the marquee, surrounded on both sides by dazzlingly beautiful people in evening wear, screaming your name and waving glossy photographs for you to autograph. That's right, Don't Panic. Your heaven is an eternal opening night, surrounded by glitz and glamour you've never imagined possible. And speaking of glitz and glamour, check you out. Your patron information doesn't make clear how you identify Don't Panic, but in your heaven, you are definitely a lady person, and a goddamn knockout to boot. You land somewhere in the middle of Marilyn Monroe, Grace Jones, and Kate Blanchett. Pro tip, you'll learn to work the knobs, so you can be all one, a half of two, or all three at once. It's your fucking heaven, you choose. Your flawless skin and statuesque physique is draped in silvery satin, pearls, and humanely sourced furs, however that happens. On your arm is a Hollywood hunk or hunkess of such camera-ready hotness it takes your breath away. There somewhere, in the middle of George Clooney, Idris Elba, Timothée Chalamet, Grace Jones, and Kate Blanchett. Again, you're going to learn to work those knobs. You swan down the carpet, pausing and contraposting for maximum glam shot effect, taking your own damn time to get into the glorious 12 million-seat Golden Rococo movie palace from the days of yore. And what is the film? Why? It's your life, Don't Panic, in real time, from conception to death at a ripe old age. The millions of adoring fans delight at your infantile cooing, your childhood fibbing, your teenage fumbling, your ceaseless masturbation, your college cheating and plagiarizing, your remarkably adroit first sexual experience with a partner, your shockingly, almost catastrophically awkward second one, your marriages, your children, your old age and grandchildren, and your peaceful death falling from the Statue of Liberty's torch dressed as Bagger Vance. That's a long story. The crowd leaps to its feet and roars with applause. The champagne pours, and you dance the night away to the actual Glenn Miller Orchestra. Then you exit the theater, and bam! Flashbulbs pop, the crowd cheers. It seems the exit to the theater is actually a limousine door, and you're back on the red carpet. You see, Don't Panic, this red carpet is less a straight line than an eternal Mobius strip. You're trapped in a quantum singularity of glamour and celebrity and embarrassingly revealing cinema forever and ever. Don't Panic, from which there is no respite and no escape. but you're really going to learn to love those knobs. So enjoy that one.
Wow.
Enjoy the knobs.
Yes,
Yeah.
enjoy the knobs.
I want to get me some of those knobs. Those sound like great knobs.
Good, very good knobs.
In the story of my life, do I have to watch the quarantine in real time, or can I fast forward through that?
I'm afraid that's how it is, Doug. That's just how cinema works.
Lordy.
It's always in real time. So that's
There
it,
you
guys.
go.
If you want to join Don't Panic in a glamorous heaven, you can certainly do so and express your generosity by going to our website, hitting the Support Us tab, and pouring in all the money you can. And if you can't do that, then it's fine. Just give us 5 stars anywhere. It's free. It is also love if you're too cheap to give money. And and that's it.
That's all there is to it.
Yeah.
So thanks, everybody, and let's get the rest of the show going. Uncle Mark,
Yeah.
I've been thinking. I've looked for hobbies for myself, and I'm not a hobby guy really.
Right.
So maybe there's a group I can join.
Yeah, maybe somebody that is welcoming,
Like
and
some sort of a lobby?
someone that lets you sit at the welcome table, and
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
And is eager to have me, and they want to teach me about their ways. It just seems like that's the kind of thing I'm looking for.
yeah, I same here, and they don't really want you to go home, and you kind of just have to eat what they say, and
Yeah.
it's belonging, it's community.
And it almost always ends up in murder-suicide. But, you got to take the good with the bad.
Yeah, 50% of the time.
I like those odds. Well, I will I will satisfy that itch, Dan.
Nice. I love it when you satisfy my itches.
We've been doing this show for what seems like an eternity, but in reality has been 138 episodes spanning about 2.5 years.
Yeah.
Wow.
However, in Trump time, it does truly seem like eons ago that we started this little thing. I looked at the main headline for the day the podcast debuted of October 2nd, 2017.
Yeah.
And it was the mass shooting in Las Vegas that killed 58 and injured over 500.
Oh my God! Seriously?
Stop it.
Yeah.
It was the same
Why
day.
would you do that to us?
it was the
No,
same
it
day
was
as-
the day that Santa Claus decided to give an extra Christmas to all the children.
I am not. I'm. Correlation doesn't necessarily mean causation. It just seems like we've been living through a series of nightmares, of which that was just one that's receded from our memory.
Yeah.
And each one somehow is worse than its predecessor. And now we're facing a reality where, as of this record, just over 80,000 of us have perished alone and lonely of COVID-19, with well over 1.35 million confirmed cases. But both those stats are almost certainly low because many people have died of unrelated ailments that were made fatal by COVID-19.
Yeah.
And with our shamefully low level of testing, we don't have a fucking clue how many people really have it.
Right.
Well,
and also,
also-
Republican officials are undercounting in their municipalities and states to try to help keep the numbers down.
Well, and also, ours is not the only country that is suffering from this pandemic.
Truly.
Absolutely.
So there's lots of other folk.
We're just doing it the American way.
We seem to be excelling
Yeah.
at it, but that's
yeah,
truly
we're
true.
fucking good at it.
This is around the globe. And while many of us are facing the terrifying reality of having to re-enter the workforce with this virus not only present but ascendant, many of us, of course, didn't have the option or luxury to quarantine ourselves and have been living through a crisis as psychological as it has been physical. We've all sacrificed so much physically, financially, and emotionally, and in many other ways to get us to this point. We've fought to flatten the curve, to keep grocery store workers and hospital workers and teachers and so many more safe by social distancing to try and mitigate the virus, the spread of the virus. And yet, our news feeds are full of people recklessly going to beaches, parties, or businesses with no masks and no regard for other people. Uncle Dan, you had some neighbors have a party last night, right?
Yeah, I don't need a news feed. My next door neighbors were throwing quite the rager last night, including outdoor karaoke and apparently they rented their own dispensers for alcoholic slushies. So they were really rocking.
Tell me they were playing bobbing for apples in like a warm, kind of nutrient-rich bath.
I can't imagine that they weren't.
Yeah.
It was very clearly we don't believe in this liberal hoax party.
Right, and that's the worst of all. There is a group of people who are convinced that this is all a hoax and demand that people remove their masks and have been even physically accosting people by getting in their faces and spraying potentially deadly droplets all over the place. The former group, going to the beaches, are mostly just fucking idiots, but the latter group resembles nothing as much as a death cult.
Yeah.
Since the Venn diagram of these virus deniers and the MAGA hat-wearing Trump crowd is a perfect circle, that makes Donald Trump their cult leader. And we've, obviously talked about this before on the show. It just seems to be kind of hitting a fever pitch right now.
Fever pitch, yeah. Unintended. I imagine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was watching the news the other day as a group of people gathered for a, virus-denying rally. I don't remember where, but I'm sure we all saw it. There were no masks. People were aggressively shaking hands to own the libs. And one woman was screaming at a clearly terrified reporter who was wearing a mask. And screaming that it's all a conspiracy and blah, blah, blah. And this poor reporter was literally shaking. She was so afraid. And I thought, what can we do about what is clearly turning into a death cult right before our eyes? And then I realized, you know who's been doing a lot of reading and thinking about cults for the past couple of years? Your audio uncles!
Yes.
Oh, God. Suddenly I feel pressure.
Yeah.
Well, I wanted to talk to you guys today about what, if anything, we have learned about cults, cult leaders, and cult followers that might give us some guidance in these dark times. So a little background on our qualifications. And we are not experts on anything at all. And, we've more or less just scratched the surface on most everything we've ever covered. But we've done segments on all major religions, including Christianity, and specifically within Christianity, Catholicism, the Mennonites, the Amish, the Anabaptists, the Seventh-day Adventists, Jehovah's Witnesses, Pentecostals, and the Church of God with Signs Following. We've talked about Mormonism, Islam, Buddhism, Hinduism, the Sikhs, Scientology, the Jains, Zoroastrianism, Manichaeism, and the Native American Church. We've talked about true and undeniable cults like the Church of the Creator, the Cult of the Shining City, the Anthill Kids, sorry about that, the Westboro Baptists, Falun Gong, Science of Identity Foundation, Colony of Dignity, Cult of Reason, Eastern Lightning, QAnon, the Order of the Solar Temple, the Branch Davidians, the Family of David, the Divine Light Mission, Heaven's Gate, the Unification Movement, the Manson Family, the Thuggies, the Movement for the Restoration of the Ten Commandments of God, cargo cults, Om Shinrikyo, the People's Temple, the Raelians, the Creativity Movement, and even science fiction cults like the Religion of the Klingons, Crom, and Jediism. We've talked.
We've covered a lot of cults.
We've covered a lot of cults,
and we're just scratching the surface.
Like half of those.
We're scratching the surface of just the sheer quantity of cults out there.
So for amateurs, we're pretty advanced,
right? Exactly.
Cult understanders.
We've talked about religious leaders like Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, Paul, Muhammad, Joseph Smith, Brigham Young, L. Ron Hubbard, and David Miscavige. The former just a few minutes ago. Cult leaders like Mark, how do you say it? Roche Theriault, I think. Roche Theriault, Fred Phelps, Lee Hongzhi, Chris Butler, Paul Schaefer, Antoine Francois Momoro, David Koresh, Marshall Applewhite, Sun Young Moon, Charles Manson, Credonia Morindi, Shoko Asahara, Jim Jones, and Ben Klassen. And we've even talked about religious adjacent kooks like Ken Ham, John Harvey Kellogg, Grigory Rasputin, John McNaughton, Ayn Rand, Brian David Mitchell, Aleister Crowley, Pastor Robert Jeffress, Pastor James McDonald, Pastor Paula White, Pastor Benny Hinn, Ray Comfort, Mike Lindell, Mitt Romney, Mother Teresa, Peter Popov, Art Bell, Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III, Gwyneth Paltrow, David Icke, Father Coughlin, the Dalai Lama, Lawrence Pastor, Oprah Winfrey, Dr. Oz, Dr. Phil, Deepak Chopra, and Mark Hoffman.
I think I just had an aneurysm. Is that a thing?
So that's that, Doug. That was our audio resume, I suppose.
Well, and that's what's crazy is since we're focusing today on cults and their leaders and followers, this list does not include dozens and dozens of dead gods, dead religions, silly stories, holy technologies, the panoply of nefarious woos, and all of our how-tos. So,
wow.
So, given our background, what have we learned, if anything, useful about cults, their leaders, and their followers? I'll just start off with, since I have been thinking about this in preparation for this segment. As for cult leaders, perhaps the most universal characteristic is toxic narcissism. It becomes so insatiable that it eclipses the desires or even the physical and emotional needs of their followers. And because you cannot, as a cult leader, allow for criticism or disagreement, the leaders come to think of themselves as all powerful and all knowing. So, I can't think of a cult whose leader, at the very least, is not a horrid narcissist.
I can't think of one off the top, for at least the ones that I've done. I can't think of one off the top of my head. The toxic narcissist and folded into that is as you said, a blatant disregard for the health and safety and needs of others, and oftentimes like a clinical inability to understand that those exist,
or even an enthusiasm to deprive their followers of things.
Yeah, cruelty.
Yeah. And I mean, denying food or water or sex or even fucking sunlight is a pretty common characteristic of cult leaders.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, it's sociopathy, it's psychopathy. It's like you usually get a lovely cocktail of an inability to be an actual human.
Yeah, and there's you mix in a pretty common sense of entitlement, an obsession with money, willingness and often enthusiasm to berate followers publicly as a way of breaking people down, the constant need to be the center of attention, a terror of being publicly humiliated, and a complete inability to admit mistakes or apologize for actions. I know that this sounds pretty much. Oh, and of course, there's a sexual component pretty much every time.
Yeah, as Steve Hassan said a few weeks on the show, it kind of comes down to sex and money.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, and I know that pretty much if you're going to have a cult, there's going to be some kind of sexual criminal behavior mixed in there at some level, oftentimes at very, very high levels. So
I can't think of one without it. I can't think of one.
Yeah.
Where that hasn't been the case.
Yeah, I mean, and we could talk for a brief second about what the difference between a religion and a cult is. Uncle Dan, you once said it was the number of followers, basically.
Well, that's one way.
Well,
I know that demographers have often looked at it that way.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, if you've got 10 adherents to your kooky philosophy, it's a cult. If you've got 1 billion, we would call it a religion. But somewhere in the middle of those two numbers is the threshold or the tipping point where we would say, oh, well, but is there a difference, substantially?
There may be, but I don't think it's a bright line. I think there's a lot of slop over.
Yeah.
Right? Like if we look at Mormonism, I grew up in a cult. The Mormonism I grew up in was a cult.
Right.
And maybe it's changed somewhat, and maybe it's modernized or at least tried to legitimize itself in the eyes of the broader world a bit. So, like there's just you can't just put things into two separate buckets. Is a cult, isn't a cult.
Right. And
Right.
at the end of the day, is there any reason to do that? Like is it
useful?
Is it useful? And I read an article in the Baltimore Sun that was a few years old from a professor of philosophy at the University of Chicago named Sam Fleischacker. Pardon me if I mispronounce that.
He's in the witness protection program. That's not a real name.
He had another metric, and it was really interesting. He says in his thinking, a cult becomes a religion in about 100 years. And the thinking is, it's actually pretty interesting, is that most cults are reflections of their charismatic and almost always bizarre leaders. So if a cult can last through several successive generations, it will typically soften its hardest edges, and for the most part, it will calm the fuck down. And
that's an excellent point, I think.
It is a good point. And it'll even find some acceptance in the larger culture just because you're used to it. Mm-hmm. So, I mean,
Totally.
but I think at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if it's a cult, what it's classified as. If it's, believing in dangerous and terrible and useless things and causing harm, then it's of a kind, right?
Well, and those who study cults, I mean, I see a lot of talk about, things like what makes it a cult is the behaviors. Are you pressured never to leave? Are you told that you're going to be completely shunned if you do leave? Are you pressured to behave in certain ways, or does it just feel like it's voluntary?
Right.
Because a lot of these things, like the social pressure is, and that's what makes Mormonism a cult, is that the social pressure is so tremendously high to stay in and to conform to very, very narrow ways of thinking and ways of behaving.
Yeah, right. and as Steve Hassan, said again when he was on, sorry to bring him up again a couple weeks ago, with his bite model, what aspects of your life are being controlled? Your appearance, your diet, your dress, your media consumption, your right. And
but
so
wouldn't that make Wahhabism in Saudi Arabia 100% a cult?
Absolutely,
right?
Of course,
sure.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think it's a matter of perspective. There's a whole bunch of different ways of looking at it. But as we talked about these characteristics of cult leaders, it sounds like I'm reading a psychological profile of Donald Trump. Yeah. And I think we can all agree that he is at least comfortable with his status in the mind of most of his most ardent followers as a semi-religious cult leader.
Any way he gets that attention is fine.
Yeah.
Right.
Totally.
And he appears to be animated and even invigorated by the suffering of his own followers, even more than his enemies sometimes.
Yeah.
But we'll never get close enough to Donald Trump to talk to him about this. And it seems unlikely that any kind of argument or reasoning would ever be effective on such a damaged or defective human being. So let's focus a bit on the only part of this equation that we'll ever have contact with, and it's the followers. We've talked about the reasons that people fall for cult leaders and cults are pretty widespread. The target audience for L. Ron Hubbard's cult was slightly different than the Anthill Kids, right? Like there's different appeals and different reasons, but the characteristics of the leaders tend to be very similar.
Yeah, and I don't know I don't know necessarily that that's true 100% between the Anthill Kids followers and the Scientologist followers. These are all people seeking some remedy to some pain or trauma in their life, right?
Right. Vulnerable people who are seeking help and camaraderie and companionship.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it seems like Trump's followers share a fear of a world that will no longer look like them, and that they may not have any use for them. And an evolving environment is always ripe for cults.
Yeah, systemic shocks are always a good time for cults to do their work.
Exactly, and whether those systemic shocks are real or perceived is kind of irrelevant.
Right.
And rather than trying to help them overcome their fear, which I would postulate, or I would say our previous president tried to do, Trump has allowed them to wallow in their fears to the point of ruin.
Oh, he's turned it into a blast furnace. Yeah, totally.
I mean, his statement that he could stand on Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and not pay a price was shocking at the time. But it seems that even he underestimated the fervor of those who tossed in with him. I mean, these people are now actively spreading a deadly virus to show their fealty to him.
Oh, there are people who would gladly volunteer to be the person on Fifth Avenue who he shot.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Just to prove him right.
Yeah, I mean, and we've all wondered when we would reach the point where his followers would look in the mirror and not recognize who was staring back at them. But I don't know that point exists, and it may. I think as a group, as a collective, it doesn't.
I think there are those people on the margins of his cult that will have a crisis of conscience. Some of them already have, and some will at some point. But I think there's a real priesthood in there. There's a real unshakable percentage of the American public. Maybe it's 25% that will never, under any circumstances, leave him.
Yeah,
And the thing about his cult is that he has tied it in, and they have tied it in with their Christianity. So literally like half of the people that are proclaiming him to be this amazing president are major pastors in the world, in this country. People who claim to speak for God and claim that God supports this president.
Well, and I think one way he's done that.
Sorry, some slightly mainstream ones like Jerry Falwell Jr. and Franklin Graham, right?
100%.
Well, and I think one of the ways he's done that, that Trump has done that, and he's been very effective at it. And again, I'm never sure how much intention there is with this guy, but he's provided his followers with a well-defined enemy that dovetails really nicely with these religious groups. And it's immigrants, it's liberals, it's the press, it's the deep state. Other dark forces are all out to take him out, and by extension, take down his followers. So, again, he's absolutely poured gasoline on the fire of fear, and it's completely scrambled the brains of these people.
Well, fear and trauma, I think, are the main drivers of anybody into an irrational situation like this, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there can be other things. I just don't think fear and anger are ever missing, among the many factors.
Yeah,
And I mean, these people have ruined family and professional relationships to follow him. They're basically,
which is true of any cult and people who join cults. It's absolutely
exactly.
is.
And they're basically in the throes of a nationwide sunk cost fallacy. The only way out is through. They cannot abide any thinking that would show even a small part of the edifice is false, because of course that would mean it's all false, and they've ruined their lives for nothing.
Right.
They've turned off information. Nothing gets through to them. They're mired in conspiracies. It's cult behavior from top to bottom, and it's fucking terrifying and disheartening.
And a lot of times, the cults that we've examined, you guys, a lot of times they kind of happen in the shadows. Right. These things develop like the Branch Davidians and the Anthill Kids and whatever. They're just kind of fringe or literally out in the forest, where we're seeing this happen on prime time every day, like on every news feed every fucking day. So withdrawing the horror of living through this as a reality for a moment, this is an amazing study in what a cult is and how they work.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, there's also this thing. There's a new forest out there. There's a new backwoods where these are brewing, and that's the internet, where you can go to just your little corner and have your little conspiracy sessions with your believers in QAnon, and nobody has to know about it, and none of your friends have to know that you're a QAnon conspiracy theorist, and none of your family has to know until you're ready to tell them all about it.
Yeah.
And and so there is still a secretive nature to the whole thing.
There is, but it's also because it's the president of the United States, it is an unavoidable reality to observe.
Yeah.
Right.
And we're in such a crisis that requires federal national leadership, that the spotlight is shining on him and it just doesn't turn off, right? Like so the sense of empowerment that his most ardent followers are feeling is becoming chronic. But I don't want to get too negative on this, because we also, as we've done our reading and research and segments on these cults, there is one thing that we have consistently seen and heard from people who have made it out of cults. And I really think this was the most succinct encapsulation of it. I'll go back to our segment on the Westboro Baptist in episode 125. The granddaughter of Fred Phelps, Megan, had a list of 4 things that we can do to help people get out of cults. And I'll just recap them here.
Yeah.
Don't assume bad intentions. Ask questions. Stay calm. And make the argument. And like you said, Uncle Mark, the cult of Trump is defined by anger, fear, and volume. Anger, fear, and volume will not work on them. They feed on that.
No, and as Steve Hassan said, is like it is useless to tell people in a cult that they're in a cult.
Right.
Like it doesn't help if the goal is to try to help get them out of it and try to make this horrible malignancy go away. That's the wrong approach. And of course, like many times with the skeptical community and with people who aren't in religion, it is incumbent on us to be the bigger quote unquote man.
Yeah.
Right. And to
or at
calm
least,
it down.
Or at least, act smarter.
Well, and it's we've talked about this before, but it's hard, especially specifically about the Westboro Baptists. It's hard to be calm and it's hard to be, clear and keep your head level when there's a guy with a long gun yelling at you during a pandemic, right?
Right.
Like the whole cult
and
is,
you're stressed too.
Yeah.
Like,
and that is not only an offensive weapon of the cult, it's a defensive weapon of the cult. Because if they can get you to lose your temper and start yelling back, then they're safe from you.
You're playing their game now, and they know the rules better than you
right.
do.
They're practicing every day. But we've learned a whole new vocabulary through this crisis of social distancing and contact tracing and this kind of thing. And if we've all worked so hard to flatten the curve of the virus, the physical, actual virus. It seems like the same tactics can be effective on a mental virus, which is what the cult of Trump is. And if we can, get enough people to stop being members of it and therefore stop being vectors of it, right? Like we can slow it.
And to be clear, I feel like we do need to clarify that this isn't about conservatism. This isn't about like GOP versus, Democrats versus Republicans. This is specifically about this man and his incredibly dangerous way of doing things and the very clear and present danger that he poses to democracy itself, not just to, one way of thinking.
Yes. His particular, mental virus has found the conservatism and republicanism as vectors, as vehicles for it, right? So there's no way to pull that out of the equation.
Right.
But we're not – the point you're making, Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, is we're not liberal Democrats sitting here telling you that Republicans are evil.
Right.
This is a much larger issue.
Yeah, we're in an existential crisis.
Yeah.
And certainly as a nation. And the followers of this person are willing to just kind of give away everything essentially to protect his feelings, give away everything that makes, we're an imperfect country, but there are many admirable things. Those will all be cashed in to protect this person's ego.
Yeah. And I want to be clear too. I am a liberal unabashedly. And I will, this isn't the podcast for that, but I'm happy to make the argument about why I think the ideas I espouse are better than blah, blah, blah. But, we're, like you said, Uncle Mark, we're talking about an existential crisis. We're talking about, we haven't been on the knife's edge like this since the Civil War.
This kills people across the ideological spectrum.
Yep. There ain't no
Right.
There ain't no peeing section in a public pool.
Yeah.
Do you remember when there were smoking sections in the restaurants, though?
And planes.
Yeah.
Wasn't that cute? When they used to have a section?
Yeah.
So, I don't want this to be a hopeless message. I do think that even people who are seemingly completely lost, the human brain is a pattern-seeking structure that wants consistency, and untruth and stupidity are hard for the brain to hold in itself. That's why these things do so much damage to the brain, right? The brain trying to reconcile itself with itself. But, if we can reason with these people and be kind and empathetic, we can make a difference. Oh, my cat wants to say something.
Well, I hope that that's true. I haven't seen a lot of evidence that reason is working, but maybe I'm just so fatalistic now that I can't see it. I have hope that that's the case.
Yeah, I mean, I also can't just say that things are rosier than you think they are. They're not.
Right.
But we're, like you said, Uncle Mark, we are watching probably the largest social experiment vis-a-vis cults in history in real time on the TV.
On all the networks.
Yeah.
At once. But, and it feels a little bit hopeless, but to quote the great sage philosopher G.I. Joe, knowing is half the battle. And just understanding what is behind this movement and what is fueling this kind of lurch into the most anti-scientific, anti-factual hall of mirrors in history is it's important to know, and it's important to understand, and I'm trying to understand it every day.
And exactly. we're not PhDs by any stretch of the imagination, but we certainly have spent some time thinking about this crap.
Yes, we're highly advanced amateurs. So great news, everyone. I take that to into your week and have a wonderful time, and happy whatever.
Okay, let's move on.
Let's move on.
Well, friends, that is it for this week's show.
Hey, we'd love to hear from you. If you've started a cult or want to visit a witch on a moon, send us an email at howto@howtoheretic.com.
Yeah, or if you're currently infiltrating the IRS, could you leave me a voicemail about it and pick up my file at 903-88-HOW-TO, which is 903-884-69-986. I'm also on Twitter at HowToHeretic.
And thanks, as always, to our amazing and cool patrons.
And thanks so much to Cody Layton for continuing to edit the show.
And thanks to you, dear friends, for tuning in.
Bye, friends.
Au revoir.